Fox News Podcast presents Bret Baier's All-Star Panel.
America's got to be in the lead if you want to deal with these threats. We're going to lead.
The mourning is over. The Shiva is done. And if you're a conservative, you should be optimistic.
You know, my main priority right now is making sure that it delivers for the American people.
We have to make our country great again, and I will do that.
I think the president gets criticized by people all the time for the stuff he says, by people who ignore what he does.
Now, Fox's chief political anchor, Bret Baier.
History made this week after President Joe Biden announced he would no longer be running for a second presidential term, endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris for the Democratic nomination. Vice President Harris raising a record $100 million within the first 48 hours of her campaign. She spoke at her campaign headquarters in Delaware on Monday.
So in the next 106 days, we have work to do. We have doors to knock on. We have people to talk to. We have phone calls to make. And we have an election to win.
Meanwhile, after a grilling on Capitol Hill, Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle resigned early Tuesday after her agency's failure to protect former President Donald Trump led to a nearly successful assassination attempt. To discuss all of this and more, we bring in our panel. Fox News senior White House correspondent Peter Doocy, host of the Ben Domenech podcast, Ben Domenech, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. Peter, we saw President Biden for the first time physically. We heard him, obviously, yesterday at that campaign event in Delaware, calling in on the phone. What's your take on the president? What's happening at the White House?
Well, the take is that this is a president who cares so much about his legacy, and he really thought that people who were his friends were going to stick with him when the going got tough. And ultimately, he was so isolated politically, with private conversations with all these electeds and former presidents that he has known for decades, that he did not see a way out. And he's going to explain to us the reasoning. His team so far insists there's not a medical issue and that he just thinks it is time to go. But it is such a dramatic turn from somebody who has talked like he was going to stick around for years, and then publicly at least didn't put up much of a fight and just completely reversed course in a surprising way.
What about his brother Frank, his sister Valerie, their statements that health was a key issue in his determination? At least that's what they told CBS News.
I read both of their statements as siblings who just want to hang out with their brother during the twilight of his life. I don't necessarily see them as accidentally admitting that there's some huge health problem, and just because they don't really talk at all. And but we will see, because it seems like we were at least a little bit misled about how the president was conducting himself behind the scenes by members of his official staff.
Sure, yeah, and we heard that for months on end. Ben, it's hard to look at this as anything but a palace coup. I mean, it really does feel sort of like this. I mean, the fact that the debate was moved up early, that was in part the Biden people wanting to get on track, but it was early enough that if something like this happened, there would be time to do something like we're seeing now. And then the coalescing that happens just overnight and not opening it up to the Democratic small d process ahead of the Chicago convention.
Bret, I think that we have to acknowledge the success, dominance, and capability here of one Nancy Pelosi, Queen of the Realm, and someone who has never been defeated when it comes to making her mind up about which way the party should go. And in the closing days of Joe Biden's tenure as the nominee, it was very clear that Pelosi and her allies, had essentially made the decision that this was, they had deployed the easy way. They had given him a glide path out. They had given him the opportunity to make the decision himself, and that if he was not going to do it himself, that they were prepared to use the hard way, and that obviously would have been a direct confrontation with him and perhaps even an attempt to invoke the 25th Amendment. To me, this is just one of the most astounding political events in the modern era and really in American history. You do not see things like this happen. And one point that I would make that I think that is underestimated about this is you have seen the Democratic elite really determine the political path of Kamala Harris from the beginning of her career. She got her way into the attorney general spot in California, narrowly winning her initial race there, and then was obviously added to the Democratic ticket despite some of the objections of the Biden family and perhaps even Joe himself, who might have preferred an alternate candidate like Senator Klobuchar. And she really was, I think, in this instance, given the every amount of opportunity that she needed to have the party coalesce around her very quickly, as they have, to have no real opposition to her taking on the role of the nominee. And I think that the way that this played out, both in public and in private, is going to be something that we're going to be talking and writing about for years to come because of this monumental coup that you talked about. The quote from John Fetterman, the senator, obviously from Pennsylvania, and one of the people who was holding on to supporting Joe Biden till the end, about the hypocrisy of people praising Joe Biden even as their fingers are still on the knives from stabbing him in the back. I mean, that's a vivid image, and it really does seem like that's what happened here.
Juan, beyond that process, because I do think that the process argument that Republicans are making now is not one that's going to last too long in the minds of voters. But it will on the policy. And obviously, Kamala Harris as nominee, and she supposedly has enough delegates to be the nominee as of now, as nominee is going to take all of the good stuff about Biden-Harris administration and the vulnerabilities. One of them is the border. And as borders are, she has a unique perspective on that.
Well, I think that's right. I think if you're looking at the negative research being done by Republicans, it starts with the immigration issue, Bret, and they are going to load it on her head. And if you look at the polls, immigration remains one of the principal concerns of American voters, left and right, by the way, but especially on the right. And this contest comes down to not so much the base of your party. I can think of some exceptions, but let me not go into it. But I think that for the swing voters, who are the focus of this election in the swing states, immigration is a negative for the Democrats, and they're going to really tie it to Kamala Harris, to the vice president. Now, the response from Harris and her advocates is clearly that she wasn't in charge of stopping people crossing the border. She was going to other countries to try to help and all the like. And secondly, that when it comes to issues like growing small business, the American economy, when it comes to fighting back on abortion rights, on those policy fronts, they see her as having an advantage going against the Trump-Vance ticket, especially the Vance part of it. And I mention that because right now, she's in the course of trying to pick a vice president to run with her on the ticket. And I think she's looking, again, at those swing states, right? As the blue wall up there, Michigan, Wisconsin, across to Pennsylvania, but also states like Arizona, North Carolina. And you can just see those are the states with Democratic governors that she might select as her running mate.
I just want to go back for one thing. You mentioned small businesses and entrepreneurs. Obviously, that's a talking point in the Biden campaign. I asked Senator Chris Coons, who's the co-chair of the Biden campaign, now co-chair of the Harris campaign, on Special Report, what is Vice President Harris's biggest accomplishment? And he said facilitating and helping small businesses and entrepreneurs and restabilizing the middle class. And I said, she did that? And he kept on going, as Senator Coons is wont to do. But I'm not sure you can say Vice President Harris was the entrepreneur vice president as we remember her in that role.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know much about it. I don't remember.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, but that's not the case. It doesn't mean that, look, I mean, if you're talking about Dick Cheney, if you're talking about Mike Pence,
Well, I mean, you could say Dick Cheney was solely focused on protecting the U.S. and you know, whatever your negatives about him, he was singularly focused on protecting the U.S. after the 9/11 attack. You know, you could talk about Mike Pence and, you know, whether he shored up evangelicals and really, you know, tried to get things passed on Capitol Hill because of his congressional history. Maybe you could say that. But as far as Vice President Harris, specifically what she did as an accomplishment, you're going to go with entrepreneurship?
I think that's what the campaign is going at, and I think that's what you heard from Senator Coons. And again, to my point to you, when you heard her speak for the very first time, and remember, most Americans are just coming to grips with the idea that this is the woman who is the Democratic Party nominee. They're coming to know her. How does she introduce herself? She said her presidency would be all about reviving the middle class, entrepreneurship, small business.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a smart talking point because
that's it.
It's not about threat to democracy. It's about an economic issue. It's just I'm not sure that she can claim anything when it comes to leadership on that issue as vice president. But maybe she has some story to tell that I haven't heard yet. Peter, is that fair? You know, that as far as her role as VP.
Yes, but I was listening as her Monday remarks in Wilmington kind of bled into the beginning of special report. And it was striking that person who was speaking to the campaign staff that all now work for her instead of Joe Biden, that is the same candidate that I covered extensively in 2019 and just the very, very beginning of 2020 before she dropped out before Iowa. But, you know, she is not required anymore to simply support Joe Biden's policies. She can come out with her own policy ideas. And the one that I remember, I chased her through the hallways of Capitol Hill for days trying to get an answer. She was a big person promoting Medicare for all, and
including illegal immigrants.
Idea that, right, and things like that are so much more progressive than Joe Biden that she eventually kind of toned down, at least publicly, because she had to promote the Biden agenda. But there's no more Biden. Tony Blinken is saying that Biden is going to spend the next couple months just trying to sew up some diplomatic efforts overseas, end the war in Israel, make sure that Ukraine's got what they need. It doesn't sound like anybody wants him to help set the domestic agenda. And so it's possible, especially in like a debate setting, that she is going to have to own these policies that are way more progressive than the ones that were part of the winning ticket last time.
All right, we're going to take a quick pause here. We'll be back after this. Ben, that's one of the reasons Joe Biden chose her, so that he could kind of rally the progressive cause, hat tip to the progressives, the Bernie Sanders, the AOCs, the Elizabeth Warrens. Kamala Harris is in that mold, much more than in the moderate mold. I mean, remember back to the CNN town hall in 2019, and she said, there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. Now, you could choose Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as your running mate. Maybe that helps in Pennsylvania, but banning fracking does not.
No, this is not the ideal candidate of choice for the Rust Belt, I will say. And I realize that, you know, Senator Coons is trying to pitch her in a different way, but we have to remember Kamala Harris, when she was in the Senate during her tenure, was 100 out of 100 in terms of how far left her voting record was. She was to Bernie Sanders left in terms of her voting pattern. She was a way for Joe Biden to satisfy, you know, progressive concerns about what kind of presidency he would have, and she fulfilled that role. Though at the same time, I think that we need to be cognizant, you know, she really has shown no acumen for some of the biggest challenges that are going to remain in the aftermath of the Biden presidency. The Wall Street Journal is out with reporting today that suggests that under Kamala, you would have Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and potentially others on the Biden foreign policy team headed to the exits in favor of people who would be more progressive, particularly when it comes to the treatment of Israel and the situation in Gaza. And that's something that I think is going to be an item of concern. I think the other items of concern are going to be that she is naturally more adept at making culture war-based progressive arguments, particularly on the issue of abortion, but on other issues as well. She favored the Green New Deal, obviously. She has, I think, going to lean into some of the gun-related issues in a way that we didn't see as much from Joe Biden. And I think that that's something that really sets her up to be a candidate that's going to lead to a very stark contrast with the Trump-Vance ticket, where in their approach, and particularly in picking J.D. Vance, I think the Trump campaign, wanted to reestablish their hold on that Midwestern blue wall. They feel like that losing, a couple tens of thousand votes in a couple of different areas in that blue wall was what decided the election in 2020. And they wanted to hedge against that. And they believed that Vance was someone who could help them with that more than potentially other candidates. Whether they're right or wrong about that, I do think that when it comes to Kamala's selection, this is going to be the first big decision that she makes in terms of the country learning more about her and where she's going to stand. And I think that establishing a permission structure for independent voters, for those so-called dual haters who disliked both Trump and Biden, to come back into the fold and consider her as an alternative, that choice is going to be very significant.
Meantime, Ben mentioned it there, Juan, but on foreign policy, we don't have a full picture of Kamala Harris, other than she's been far more aggressive when it comes to criticizing Israel in this current Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. Back in March, she was one of the first to deliver a speech about calling for a ceasefire, a full ceasefire. But the reporting at the time was that it was sent to the National Security Council for review and was much harsher on Israel than they could stomach, even in this White House, and it had to be watered down before she delivered it. She is not going to the speech from Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. She's allegedly supposed to meet with him on Thursday, perhaps with President Biden, before he heads to Mar-a-Lago down in Palm Beach. But this is another issue where there's a big, big change in the two parties and how they're dealing with this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and I think you heard this from Senator Coons when you posed a similar question on Special Report this week. The response from the Biden-Harris or Harris, whatever, X ticket, is that she is with the Biden policy, which is extremely supportive of Israel to the point of great concern among not only Arab Americans, notably in Michigan, swing state, but among Americans in general, according to the polls about, what's going on and how aggressive Israel has been. And Netanyahu is not a popular figure in America, even among Jewish people. But to your point about her being posed as a radical, outside on foreign policy issues, I think it's critical to understand from inside the Democratic campaign's thinking, they are going to select a candidate for VP in part to counter J.D. Vance, the man who was selected as, to double down on President Trump's MAGA base. And they want to portray Vance and Trump as the extremists, the radicals in this picture. So people may want to say, hey, Kamala Harris is she's the one that's more progressive, 100 of 100 senators, as Ben was saying. But wait a second, the Democrats will say she was a prosecutor. She is the one who put people in jail. And as you heard from her, she now wants to tell people that she knows people like Donald Trump who've been convicted of fraud and, found liable for sexual assault. That's going to be part of it, that she's not the liberal progressive that Republicans would tell you, that in fact, she is more mainstream than the MAGA extremists. So get ready for
And she opens up that door, Juan, and it opens up the whole debate with Tulsi Gabbard on, I think it was the second debate, if I'm right, Peter, where Tulsi Gabbard just really undid her on the stage as far as her prosecution of minor drug crimes. And from the left, she was taking heat. From the right, she was taking heat as district attorney that didn't prosecute some of the bigger crimes and let people go.
Yes. And so that was in the second debate. That first debate where she really went after then former Vice President Biden, several books have been written already about how there's some real lingering resentment from members of the Biden family, including the First Lady, towards Kamala Harris for doing that. And that is part of what makes his decision to willingly bow out and then endorse her all the more surprising, because we know that it got down to a point where he was pretty much just with his family and some advisors who are like family. And it really seemed like that was something working against Harris as the heir apparent. And that's what, so whatever changed was a real hard turn in the last couple of days.
Ben, last thing I want to leave with this, and that is this Politico story that we've confirmed that the Justice Department has discovered these transcripts of Biden chats with his biographer. Just today, they worked on memoirs published in 2007 and 2017. Prosecutors said they couldn't find the transcripts and they didn't provide them. Now they have found them, and they've reached out to Special Counsel Hur. In the past few days, the department located 6 electronic files consisting of a total of 117 pages that appeared to be verbatim transcripts of a small subset of the Biden publisher audio recordings created for the special counsel by a court reporting service. So now they are reaching out to her to find out what material he relied on for key portions of his report. And that audio that we've been, anxious to hear and Republicans have been trying to get may actually come forward. This is 2 days after he dropped out of the race.
Bret, I'm sorry, but I can't take more conspiracy theories in July 2024. It seems.
Did you see the Babylon Bee? They said Republicans and Democrats up in arms because all conspiracy theories have come true. They're out. There's no more. The sheer volume of them is overwhelming at times. But the Department of Justice is doing itself no favors when it comes to this, because of course, people are going to jump to the conclusion that that this is something that was connected to him dropping out, or that they were waiting for him to drop out in order to release. We can't make that connection, but it's 2 days later.
We can't, but it's just there's too many people who are going to come to that conclusion, whether it's true or not. And I think, look, we have seen the complete collapse of faith in so many institutions over the past several years, during COVID, during everything that came out of it, during our lack of faith in health institutions, our lack of faith in the government in terms of things, and most recently the collapse of faith in the Secret Service of the United States of America, tasked with protecting the people who are at the center of our politics, including with the stepping down of their director today. I am just I have no solution for this situation, Bret. I wish I did, because these institutions need to be trusted. They need to be trusted by both Republicans and Democrats alike. They need to be trusted by independents. They are at the center of our functioning government, and we ought to have faith in them to be able to fulfill the basic functions of what we task them to do under the Constitution.
Yeah, well, they need to stop acting fishy. They need to come with answers. They need to have a nugget of information when you're coming to a hearing about an assassination attempt.
It was astounding to see that performance in front of the Congress, and to see, it's pretty rare that you have such a bipartisan level of disgust with the lack of competence in such a critical role. But I appreciated it, because to see AOC and Nancy Mace and to see, Republicans and Democrats alike raising these critiques was important and was valuable, and was something that Congress ought to do, but they should never have been put in a position to do it. And I think that this is of a piece of the whole. And unfortunately, with the rise of Kamala Harris and with, the competition we're about to see here, I don't know that the next administration is going to be able to establish that kind of transparency, that kind of confidence that we need to have in American institutions on all sides of the aisle.
Hope springs eternal. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Now for a bit of history. On July 23rd, 1903, Ford Motor Company sold its first automobile. Though Henry Ford built his first experimental car in 1896, it wasn't until 1903 that he and 11 investors put their heads and cash together to create the Ford Motor Company, designing the 1903 Model A, a two-seat runabout with innovative features like a safety glass windshield and now the iconic blue oval logo. By the time the car was sold to a Chicago dentist, the company had spent nearly all of its cash investment putting their hopes and, for many, their life savings into Ford's vision. It would soon become clear that would be the best decision of their lives. 5 years later, in 1908, the highly successful Ford Model T would revolutionize the country, popularizing the moving assembly line and providing Americans with the first affordable mass-produced car. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Juan, Peter, and Ben, I'm Bret Baier. We'll see you next time. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.